Welcome into the Alabama Postgame Show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. I'm Simone Eli alongside Matt Scalisi. Alabama bounces back in a big way. Matt and I talked in pregame about how you don't want to be the team that has to play the Tide after the Tide lose, because it doesn't happen very often. But when they have to have the bounce back games, it tends to get pretty scary for the opponent. That's exactly what happens tonight as Alabama rolls 49-9, the final in Starkville over Mississippi State. Matt, this really checking all the boxes here for Alabama. Offensively, defensively, it felt like maybe a little bit of a slow start for about 3 seconds for Alabama, but otherwise, I mean, what more could you ask for?
Yeah, they needed to make a statement today, and they absolutely did on both sides of the ball. You know, I think it was interesting to watch this game in the first half because I actually think they didn't have it figured out early in this game. I think that they struggled with some things, and you do see that sometimes coming off of a really tough game, but it seemed like they genuinely had done some work this week. They had figured some things out, and those lessons started to kick in over the course of this game. Now, we, of course, don't know how much of this was Mississippi State struggling in this game, but I think a lot of it had to do with how well Alabama played. I think you saw all of the things that you didn't see against Texas A&M that hurt them last week. The pass rush was there tonight, particularly one man in particular. The deep passing game was there tonight. The being able to handle blitzes and different pressures was there. The run game was there for Alabama.
Yeah.
Everything that they were missing a week ago was back on track tonight. And it wasn't hitting right out of the gate. They had to work on it. Sure. And by the end of this game, I think Alabama looked like they were back to being something closer to what Alabama fans recognize.
No question about that. Let's talk the offense first to start and what Bryce Young was able to do. I mean, give Starkville credit. The Cowbells, it's a loud environment. I mean, it's a lot. It was rowdy in the beginning. The Bulldogs were able to move the ball a little bit to start. I was kind of like holding my breath there for a minute, like, all right, are we going to have a repeat performance here in Starkville? Are they going to struggle defensively? Things obviously settled down with the early pick, and then Bryce Young goes and leads a scoring drive, but 20 of 28 for 348 with 4 touchdowns. I mean, these numbers are pretty unheard of. This is very impressive for a guy that is 7 games into his starting his career here for Alabama. Matt, I just am blown away by what he is able to do and the protection that he got today. And then again, Brian Robinson. So just really all over the board, it felt like a cohesive effort offensively for Alabama.
Yeah, and I think even more so than a really impressive stat line, I think what impressed me watching this game from Bryce Young was how he handled himself when things didn't go well, and how he handled the pressure that Mississippi State threw at him. I know we're all used to not thinking very much of Mississippi State, but the truth is this is actually statistically one of the better defenses in the league so far this year, particularly their rushing defense. And they were tough early in this game. They were playing with a lot of toughness and a lot of physicality. And I would also say early on in this game, Bryce Young was struggling once again, making decisions when he was being attacked by a heavy blitz. We saw Texas A&M do it a week ago, and I think everybody saw that game and said, we're going to do this to Bryce Young and prove that he can throw his way out of it. Tonight he did that. He found guys on hot routes. He used check downs really well. I think Bill O'Brien should be credited for mixing in some more screens and things that helped Bryce Young get out of trouble in those situations. Sure. They weren't 100%. He still took some sacks. He still made a few bad decisions in those situations, but much, much better performance overall from Bryce Young this week in those tougher pressure situations than he did a week ago.
Yeah, someone just asked me a second ago in the comments. I said that stats were unheard of. They are unheard of. I mean, these are impressive numbers, y'all. Where have I been?
Sure they are.
It's impressive to see what Bryce Young has done. I mean, give credit to where it's due. He's started 7 games in the SEC, and the guy is consistently putting up big numbers. I mean, that's impressive. That's all I was trying to say.
There's no question. Simone, you go back. I mean, we've already seen the stats. If you watch the broadcast on TV, this is statistically the best start that an Alabama quarterback has had to his career ever in history.
Yeah.
So I understand. I understand judging this guy against what we saw a year ago, and that's natural to do that. But it's important to remember that Mac Jones had been practicing in that system and being a backup and having experience for years before he got to that point. Same was true for Jalen Hurts. Same was true for Tua Tagovailoa before he finally got in the game. They both had actually been on campus a lot longer before they got in the game. And Bryce Young is really being thrown in with very little experience because of how little he was able to play last year in competitive games. I think it's important to remember that for sure. I agree, Simone. And I would also say, looking at outside of Bryce Young, what the other guys on this team are doing, this offense after a really rough week last week. I mean, you go back and look through, it wasn't just individual players that exploded on this offense. It was whole units. I mean, this wide receiver core tonight, 20 total receptions for this group, and it was spread around. Mechie had 7. I mean, Mechie was the big guy tonight with 7 receptions, but you look at Jamison Williams, a couple of fantastic plays from him, but particularly the long touchdown. Trayshawn Holden made some really great plays tonight. Brian Robinson as a receiver getting involved and making himself even more dangerous. And, honestly, even though he had, I would say, one of the best catches of the game taken away from him very questionably, a good solid game for Slade Bolden too tonight.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, just completely spread around all over. It felt as though this Alabama offense and defense, for sure, we're going to get to the defense, really had a chip on their shoulder coming into this game. They took note of what their coaches were saying. They took note of what one man who we know has been verbal in the locker room, Will Anderson, has been saying. And Matt, you alluded to him a second ago, but Will Anderson is from a different planet, y'all. I don't know where he came from. I don't know what created. I don't know how you become the man that he is, but wow. I mean, that guy, when he is on, and he was today.
Incredible individual performance. I mean, one of the best single game pass rushing performances I can remember seeing at Alabama under Nick Saban. Somebody can call me out if there's a stat out there that says there was a better game for somebody, but I need to look it up and go through the book. But I mean, it was incredible. He was unblockable in this game. He was taking over the Mississippi State offensive line. They couldn't stop him. And honestly, they didn't have an answer. They couldn't adjust during the game and figure out some way to avoid what he was doing. It completely blew up whatever Mike Leach's game plan was in this game. And honestly, I don't like to see guys get hurt, but I think he was so effective. We saw early in this game at getting to Will Rogers, the Mississippi State quarterback. He never really played this game feeling 100% because he got roughed up so early in this game by that Alabama pass rush. I mean, this was a brutal, dominating effort by Alabama's defensive front.
Yeah, poor guy is going to need some ice, an ice bath, all the things. I mean, hopefully
I hope he's in the locker room chewing on ibuprofen right now.
Yeah, or chewing on his offensive lineman for not blocking nobody. But so guys, not only Anderson, but how about the Bama secondary? I mean, Jordan Battle, Jordan Battle in that in the pick six, man, just really seemed to set the tone early on. I mean, Bama's offense goes, scores early, but to kind of be backed up like that by the defense as well is so helpful to the offense. It's helpful to Bryce Young. It's helpful to those guys who are watching that to get them amped up and to know, like, this defense has our back. We just went up 14-3 or whatever it was at that point. But they just came out really with a chip on their shoulder, Matt. And I was impressed. Not going to lie. I was impressed.
Yeah, look, anytime you hold the opposing team to under 300 yards in the modern day of football, that's a really, really good defensive performance. Yeah, I think if you're watching this game, there were probably some frustrating moments. There were certainly plenty of first downs for Mississippi State in this game, but I think you gotta adjust your expectations against an offense like this and understand that it's about stopping a drive. And Alabama did it 100% of the time. They never let Mississippi State into the end zone. I think it's also hard to judge the full effect of this defense, because we're all going to look at it and say, well, giving up 300 yards passing, that's not great for the defense. But guys, the way that this offense operates from Mississippi State, that's the whole offense.
Well, I do. Yeah,
If you stop them from passing all over you, you've stopped them. They had -1 rushing yards total tonight. Yeah. It wasn't even they weren't even trying to run the ball. So the secondary had a lot expected of them. They had to do a lot of things. They were going to give up some plays. They were going to give up some first downs. The important thing is not letting them into the end zone. And Alabama, this is pretty close to a shutout. This is about as close to shutouts as we get against an offense like this.
No question. And I think that the biggest thing is that Alabama responded. There's lots of teams throughout the country that take a loss, a huge disappointing loss on the road, and Alabama is able to bounce back. They were challenged, not only by their coach, but challenged by guys in the locker room, Matt, and challenged really by the country. I mean, they've dropped down to 5th in the country. You start to wonder, okay, the SEC West is completely wide open, which remains to be the case. But, you start to get, how much is that going to work into your mind? How much are you going to let that creep into practice, into your performance? And for Alabama to bounce back and to rebound in the way that they have speaks volumes about this team. It really speaks volumes about what's going on inside the locker room. A lot of things that we were all questioning 7 days ago when we were sitting here wondering, okay, what's going on? There's all these issues. Will Anderson's mad. Bama takes a really bad loss on the road, but it seems as though, all right, this is the Nick Saban coach team that we have seen year in and year out, to be able to bounce back like that and play 4 quarters, play a complete game. It seemed like there was really no let up with this team. That's one thing that Saban has harped on all season. There was no let up. Bama played into the 4th quarter. Bryce Young played into the 4th quarter. I mean, guys, the defense locked down into the 4th quarter. That's a big deal.
I think it was so important to see them do that for their momentum going forward in the season. I think you wanted to see them not necessarily. I mean, they've had so many games this year where they were blowing the other team off the board in the 1st and 2nd quarter, and then they kind of let up in the 2nd half. Well, it was sort of the opposite tonight. They looked a little bit rough. They looked a little hungover early in this game, and man, it was all gas and no brakes in the 2nd half, and they couldn't do anything wrong as the game went on. They heated up. They figured out what was working. They started really getting into a groove and feeling it. And that's a great thing to see if you're Alabama. You want to see that going into the Tennessee game next week, going into really the back stretch of your season where you've still got, this game against a good Tennessee offense at least next week. I don't know that the defense is necessarily going to be much of a challenge here, but there are some challenging aspects to Tennessee. You've got LSU still ahead, which we saw today. LSU maybe not, they're not as good as we thought they were. They might not be as bad as we thought they were either. They come up with a big win against Florida today. We know Auburn is now creeping around out there waiting at the end of the season, looking like they might be a pretty challenging team.
Could be.
So there's tough challenges ahead for Alabama. It's not all smooth sailing to the SEC championship, and they're going to need to, I think, give the kind of effort they gave tonight in games where the other team is pushing back a little bit harder than Mississippi State did.
Yeah, so Alabama will be at home next week against Tennessee, the 3rd Saturday in October, before the bye week, which, of course, you want to go into the bye week with a win. It's no secret that Tennessee is not, some national contending Tennessee team. But, Matt, if you're Nick Saban, if you're this team looking at how this performance went tonight, what are you looking for outside of a win and not many injuries next Saturday at home, an evening game kind of going into that bye week? Anything particular that you're trying to clean up or that is sticking out in your mind?
Well, like I said, Tennessee's a pretty good offensive team. I mean, they don't seem to be able to stop many people is part of the issue. They're not a great defensive team, and that's good news for the Alabama offense that we saw tonight. But they are a team that can challenge this Alabama defense, and as well as Alabama played tonight, they've got some things they can improve. They still, I think, need to be able to more consistently rush the passer like they did tonight. I think they mostly did a pretty good job, but they're not that consistent at it yet. I think they can still improve in that area. I think also the secondary, you're not going to make every stop. You're not going to break up every pass attempt, but you got to try and do it without pulling penalties. And I think that's continued to be an issue for this Alabama secondary is just sloppy play, just making the kind of mistakes you don't need to make. Again, they weren't tested at all in the run game tonight, and that will be more of an issue against Tennessee. They're definitely a better rushing team. I mean, basically everybody Alabama plays is going to be a better team on the ground than Mississippi State was tonight. So there are questions that still need to be answered by this defense, and I think Tennessee will provide a pretty good gut check for them.
Yeah, the biggest one for Alabama when it comes to answering questions was, can the Tide rebound after adversity? Can the Tide come back after a loss that was a huge disappointing blow for Bama, who was at one time ranked number 1 in the country, now 5th. Of course, I think the Tide will now move into the top 4 with the loss that Iowa took to Purdue. Again, I mean, the AP poll only matters so much nowadays. It really doesn't matter at all, especially because of the college football playoff. But Alabama gets it done at Mississippi State, and really just a balanced attack overall. Running back to the numbers for those just tuning in the post-game show, Bryce Young goes 20 of 28 for 348, just a very efficient game from a guy who is only 7 games into starting his career with the Tides. I just think that's an impressive number. 4 touchdowns, and then a very balanced attack. The running game was impressive. Brian Robinson did everything you could ask him to do. 73 yards doesn't seem like much, but Brian Robinson, I can't overstate his role. I mean, not only does he get those yards that matter, those 2-3 yards, shortage yards, but he's also great in the protection. I mean, I really was impressed. There were some moments where Bryce Young hit the deck, but nowhere near what we saw a week ago, Matt.
And I think we got to point out the big thing that everybody complained about in the Alabama fan base a week ago of getting inside the 3-yard line and not running the ball when you got that opportunity. The Alabama coaching staff got the message. They heard your complaints and they addressed it tonight. And when they got the opportunity multiple times, they were not going to throw a pass close to the goal line tonight. They lined up and they needed to prove a point, and they did it. They pounded the ball inside with Brian Robinson. And honestly, I think that's an important moment for this team to establish its offensive identity. The other thing I wanted to bring up, Simone, about this team's performance tonight, 3rd down really went Alabama's way on both sides of the ball, and in a way that that was an issue for them a week ago at Texas A&M. Tonight, you look at the 3rd downs for both teams had 16 attempts on 3rd down tonight. Alabama converts on 12 of the 16. Mississippi State only 7 of 16, so less than 50%. So they really did a much better job of, once they got Mississippi State to 3rd down, most of the time they got off the field at that point defensively. And then on the other side, I think 16 is still a lot. Alabama was not super efficient on 1st and 2nd down in this game, but they managed to find guys. They managed to convert on 3rd down when they needed to keep drives alive. And I think it only got easier for them and a little bit smoother as the game went on. But good to see for both of those items, I think.
Yeah, things got easier and smoother for Alabama in this game against Mississippi State. Not necessarily the case when the schedule moving forward. Tennessee, a rivalry game that matters to a lot of people. It's one thing they won't say it's a game that matters a lot to a lot of people, and it does. It's 3rd Saturday in October. It's going to be at home. It's a night game. Then the bye week. LSU, and then Arkansas and Auburn to round out the SEC schedule. So still some challenges out there. Of course, the Auburn game is always difficult, but right now Alabama doing everything you want the Tide team to do, bouncing back from that loss to Texas A&M last week. So Alabama gets it done, 49-9, the final over Mississippi State in Starkville. Thanks so much, y'all, for tuning in to the Alabama post-game show. He's Matt Scalisi. I'm Simone Eli. We will see you next week as we preview the 3rd Saturday in October. Y'all have a great rest of your evening.
Medical Properties Trust, at the very heart of healthcare.